Our next speaker has a really fun title. Nanotechnology. It makes me feel cool to say it. Rishi Patel is a senior research scientist with Missouri State University's Center for Applied Science and Engineering at the Jordan Valley Innovation Center. And we are really glad to have him here on the library stage tonight. Let's welcome Rishi.
Thank you for the introduction. Just a little brief background of JVIC. JVIC started back in 2003. At least the Center for Applied Science and Engineering started back in 2003. We're located in downtown Springfield. We originally started on the campus of Missouri State University. And the idea behind JVIC was to actually be a technology accelerator, to actually work with companies, especially technology companies, and progress their technology using the resources and the academic individuals at the university. And most of our technology that we've been working with is nanotechnology. So to kind of get into it, what is nanotechnology? Now, if you look it up, the general definition that they give you is nanotechnology is the science and engineering that is conducted at the nanoscale, which is around the range of 1 to 100 nanometers. So what does that mean? All right. So to give you an example, we'll do a size comparison. All right. So we all know what a tennis ball is. Now, in terms of size, a tennis ball is about 6.75 centimeters, which is 67.5 million nanometers. Now, an ant is about 9 millimeters, which is 9 million nanometers. A human hair is in the range of about 100 nanometers. Viruses are around 100 nanometers. Now we're getting into that upper scale of where nanotechnology is. And below that, we get down to what's a carbon nanotube there, and the diameter of that carbon nanotube is about 1 nanometer. And this is the realm, the 1 nanometer to the 100 nanometer realm is where we do a lot of our research. So some of the nanomaterials that we work with are allotropes of carbon. And an allotrope of carbon is a material or a molecule that's completely composed of just one element, in this case being carbon. So fullerenes, carbon nanotubes, and graphene. And so in the upper right-hand corner there, the upper left is what looks like a soccer ball. It's actually a fullerene. Below that is a carbon nanotube. And if you actually cut a nanotube on one edge, you can actually open it up and you get what's called graphene. So it's essentially, they're the same material of carbon. Other materials that we work with are quantum. Actually, this is an SEM. So before I go any further, to actually see these materials, we need high-powered microscopes. And traditional light microscopes just can't view into this world. So what we end up having to do is use what are called electron microscopes. And that is a scanning electron microscope with carbon nanotubes. And then also other nanoparticles. These are actually silver nanoparticles. And again, this is actually taken with an electron microscope. Some of the other particles that we actually study are what are called quantum dots, and they're based on semiconductor materials. So you have metallic materials and semiconductor materials that make up the nanoparticles that we actually end up working with. Now, what are some of the applications of these nanomaterials? The biggest one where a lot of research is going on is energy. Solar cells, carbon nanotubes, or CNTs for short, fullerenes and quantum dots have all found application in solar cells. Batteries, so imagine fast charging batteries, batteries that can charge within a few seconds to a few minutes. Also in medicine, drug delivery for cancer drugs, where the molecules are actually targeted to just the cancer cells and rather than chemotherapy where the whole body is being irradiated. And also bandages, antimicrobial Silver nanoparticles are used so that to adhere to, or at least to mitigate infection. Now these are just some of the few applications. There's actually a lot more that I actually haven't put into here. The image on the right there is actually what's called a solar spectrum. So when the sun hits our atmosphere or the Earth, the green part is actually what the solar spectrum is. Traditional photovoltaics, which are silicon solar cells, which is the industry standard, they actually can only convert the amount of energy in the blue region there. Okay. Now with quantum dots, which is the image at the bottom here, the size of the particle can absorb a different spectrum of the wavelength that comes in, allowing you to actually collect more of that energy. So the more of the energy, the higher the efficiency. So we can actually get better efficiency solar cell, better conversion of solar to electrical energy. The nice thing about these quantum dots is that they can be formulated into an ink form. So by formulating them into an ink form, you can actually coat them and use printing processes to actually coat them. So it actually reduces the manufacturing costs as well. That's one of the big things with the silicon solar cells is the cost of manufacturing. Because it requires highly sophisticated pieces of equipment, the cost ratio is where these quantum dots actually have great application. Other areas of applications are electronics, central processing units. We all have smartphones and laptops. The image up there on the upper right there is actually a cross-section of a transistor, which is a silicon-based transistor. We all have these. These are actually functioning right now in our phones that we have in our pockets. And the next generation below it that is being touted is the carbon nanotube, is using a single nanotube device. We're still a bit of ways from that technology, but that's one of the progressions of this technology. Other areas, sensors, displays, televisions and monitors, as well as flexible displays. The new areas that we're going to see are actually flexible displays. And then also lighting. And I'll get into lighting a little bit more later in this presentation. So let's take a step back to past technologies. Past technologies, and then two in particular that I'm going to be talking about are, one is being asbestos, which is a naturally occurring silicate, which got wide use in the mid-19th century. The advantage of asbestos was that they had excellent tensile strength. They were fire retardant. They were really good insulators of sound, heat, and also electrical insulators. And they were inexpensive. So they got wide use by a lot of different areas, especially in the military applications. Every branch of the military also actually started using these materials. But what ended up happening was they found out that they were highly toxic, and the high toxicity leading to cancers and lung disorders. So another example are CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons, which are organic compounds that contain carbon, chlorine, and fluorine. Again, in the 1920s, they increased use as refrigerants, propellants, and solvents. They were a replacement for ammonia-based refrigerants, which are actually very toxic. And the advantages of CFCs were that they were low toxicity, low reactivity, and low flammability. Now, again, another disadvantage was that they found out that it depletes the ozone layer. Now, the image on the right there is actually a projection that NASA did based on modeling, and they found that if we hadn't curtailed the use of CFCs and started regulating them, by 2060, we would have actually depleted our ozone layer. So you can actually see the bluish area there at the bottom is where, by 2060 would have been completely gone. So what does that tell us? Risks associated with nanomaterials. This was a paper that was submitted back in 2007. Government agencies such as the NIH did a study on trying to determine what are the effects that nanomaterials have on us. And because of their size, they can be readily absorbed through our skin. We can inhale them very easily, and we can also ingest them very easily as well. So figuring out what are the exposure limits, and also figuring out what are some of the associated diseases that could happen with nanotechnologies. So without getting too much into this, what were the lessons learned? So the approaches that we came up with was having a multi-organizational as well as a multidisciplinary collaboration. So by multi-organizational, in our case, we partnered with ERDIC EL, which is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Research and Development Center at the Environmental Laboratory in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Brewer Science was actually spearheading this effort because it's their technology that we're trying to accelerate out to the market. And then with our group at the Jordan Valley Innovation Center, so you're using government, industry, and academia to actually get from a technology from the lab out to the market, but doing it in a safe and responsible manner. And then the multidisciplinary collaboration. We're utilizing areas from biology, chemistry, physics, math, and computer science. And also in the engineering field, biological, chemical, civil, environmental, electrical, and mechanical. So amongst these three organizations, you have the multidisciplinary collaborative expertise. So one of the tools that we actually use for determining, if a product is safe or not is called a life cycle analysis. And the diagram on the right there is what a life cycle analysis actually does. Is we start at the top there, which is research and development, and that's the material. And we want to look at not just the material itself. How is it mined? Is it grown? What is the energy required to actually get the raw material? As well as what's the research that actually goes into actually formulating a product. And then once that product goes from research and development, we get into manufacturing. And as we get into manufacturing, again, the same thing. A life cycle analysis has to be done in a manufacturing area as well. Can we reduce the waste? Can we reduce the amount of our carbon footprint, the energy that actually goes into making these materials? Can we also reduce the workplace safety? Because again, we're working with nanomaterials. So the workforce that's actually working in this area are going to get exposed to these materials. And so they have to make sure that if they are getting exposed to these, that they're actually things like fume hoods. They have respiratory masks to make sure that they're actually safe in that environment. And then you're getting into application and product. Again, the same thing. What's the energy required to get from manufacturing to product, and then the end user. And that's typically people like yourselves who actually are using these products. And then after you end up using these products, what happens at the end of the life of that product? So it's actually called a cradle to grave analysis. And do we recycle these products, or do we actually do they end up in waste streams or landfills? And so doing this type of analysis, it actually helps businesses. It supports business strategy, research direction, regulation, as well as education. So to give an example of an LCA example, let's take the light bulb. The incandescent light bulb, the compact fluorescent light bulbs, which is probably what most of us use right now, and then also the LED lamps, which are a little bit expensive right now, but are becoming cheaper and cheaper as time goes on. So what's the carbon footprint? The number of lamps needed to supply 20 million lumen hours takes 22 incandescent lamps, it takes 3 CFL lamps, and it takes 1 LED lamp. So it tells you that as technology progresses, we're actually reducing that carbon footprint. But within each area, we want to know exactly what that carbon footprint is in actually manufacturing it, and also what's the materials that actually go into it. So for example, the compact fluorescent light bulb actually has mercury in it. And we all know that we should actually recycle these bulbs, right? Because they do have mercury in them. And it shouldn't end up in landfills, which is not the case for incandescents and not the case for LEDs. But then what's the next technology? So the next technology could be quantum dots. Again, a printable technology that can actually reduce the cost, so again, reducing that carbon footprint, but at the same time, making sure that these materials are toxic or non-toxic. So we have to determine that as we do a life cycle. So this kind of starts the whole cycle again as a new technology comes out. So decision making and stakeholders. So this whole life cycle analysis work that we do, initially it's for decision making. It's for businesses, the technology companies that are actually making decisions on whether or not to take a technology from lab to market, and also the government support. So whether it's research dollars that goes into these technologies, and regulation. Are these materials toxic or are they not toxic? And so what are the proper regulations that need to be put into place for companies as well as researchers to make sure that these technologies are brought out in a safe manner? And then education. And by education, it's not just workforce education or education in the sense of students, but it's also educating the public, making them aware of what these products are, where they come from, how they're developed, and how they are impacted by these technologies. So, which gets into who the stakeholders are. The stakeholders are businesses and investors, who are actually trying to generate a profit. The stakeholders are also the insurers, because if these technologies are not safe, insurers aren't going to insure you. So they're also have a stake in this game. And then the researchers and the workforce. When we work on technologies, we could be working on these technologies for 10, 15 years, and then realize that, well, this technology is actually harmful for the environment or harmful to people. So again, it helps us, this life cycle analysis actually helps us make those decisions. And then also government entities, because a lot of these technologies actually end up being used by government entities such as the DoD and DOE. And then also the regulators, the EPA, NIOSH, who is the workplace, as well as OSHA, workplace safety. They also need to have a stake in the game. And then also our political leaders who will, pass laws governing whether or not these materials should be used or should be banned. And then the last also is the consumers or the general population, because all these technologies will impact you in some way, shape, or form. So you are also a stakeholder within this nanotechnology framework. Thank you.